So I had to go and learn all that. I had to learn that skill set to compete at the top of the food chain. And then when I take that skill set and I go and do my own personal work or whatever, I carry all that skill set with me.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Photo Pros Weekly. I'm Brandon Heiss, and I'm here again with Olivia Tuttle. This week, we're going to take a deep dive in with Joel Grimes. Now, Joel is a commercial advertising photographer based out of the Phoenix, Arizona area. Joel, how the heck are you?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you for having me on here.
Well, we're happy to have you. And for those people that don't know Joel Grimes, which I don't know if there are many of them out there, Joel, tell us about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your career and what you've been up to lately.
Well, I started photography classes in high school, and I'd already been very much into like drawing, and I just loved the idea of doing like either an art project or something that I could put my name on and step back and look at it and say, that's mine. I did that. That's my creation. And so when I picked up photography, I thought, oh, this is the coolest thing ever. But I never really thought about it as a career. My dad was a fireman, a fire chief of Tucson. Two of my brothers became firemen. So my dad wanted me to be a fireman. And so, but I had this, I don't know, something about it. I wanted to be an artist, photographer type person.
You were the
And
rebel.
so I started taking.
You were the rebel of the family. You were the black sheep of the family. What'd your dad think? I mean, you didn't live up to his expectations of being a fireman.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine whose mother started to get dementia, and he'd go visit her, and she couldn't remember his name, and they had 4 kids, I think. But she'd say, "You're the one that caused me to have lots of problems."
So she remembered you.
She couldn't remember his name, but she remembered he was a handful.
Oh.
And I think my parents would be the same. My dad's passed away, but my mom would say, "Yeah, that Joel is a handful." But I think photography is this incredible sort of arena of or a world that has a mixture of both technical and the creative. It's 2 worlds that have to collide. I think often we tend to gravitate to one side or the other a little bit. So we tend to be more technical, and then when it comes to the creative process, we scratch our head and go, what should I do? Some people are so creative they don't know how to focus their camera, or maybe that's part of their technique. They, shoot everything out of focus, whatever it is. But
that's the art.
It's the art, right? I think my goal from early days was to be able to blend those 2 worlds together. So I always look at, say, a weakness that I have, which we all have plenty of weaknesses. I have many. And I think, how do I overcome that? How do I get better at that? There are things that come really easy for me. So I go, well, I don't have to work on that because, it comes easy. So I'm a very goal-oriented person. I look out way ahead and I say, that's where I want to end up. And then I go and I beat whatever it is into the ground, and I work hard and I get to that end result. And I think often what happens is people see you at the end result, and then they say, oh, you are amazing, you're talented, you're gifted, you're all these things, when they don't really see that it took me 10 years or 20 years or whatever hard work.
Exactly.
And
that's the old 10,000 hour rule, right? That you have to put in, and they just see you at the finish line and they say, man, Joel's got it easy, So
I've also had to learn to adapt to change in the industry. A lot of my colleagues I started out in Denver as a commercial photographer, and rubbed elbows with a lot of young photographers. We went through the ranks together. But a lot of them could not make the change from film to digital or other changes too in the industry. They just couldn't do it, and they died by the wayside. And one of the things I have to do, or I'm always thinking about, is where is the market going? What can I do to adjust myself to that market change? Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it's a lot more work than I want, but I know that I can't just sit idle. So that's part of my, I think, success has been that I'm willing to pull up my bootstraps and say, okay, I don't want to learn this, or I don't, this is over my head, or my mindset doesn't really fit this very well, but I have to learn it, and I'm going to learn it to get to that end result and continue to be a working photographer. I always say I want to be a working photographer. That's been my goal for since I was 19 years old, and make a living with my camera. That's the sort of what I set out to do.
So give us an example of that. I mean, is it one of those things where you see everybody running one way and you want to run the opposite way because you want to be different, because you think you're more marketable that way? I mean, why do you think that is?
I think that early on I was involved in music, was in a band, used to write and sing songs and stuff. And you have to analyze, when you go to become a songwriter or produce a what we call a signature or a sound or something that people uh, um, remember you by. You have to be marketable, but you have to stand out too. So I think that with that sort of early sort of arena that I had to work in a little bit, also it translates into photography. I think that I like the idea of being an individual. I like the idea of having a signature brand or something that separates me from the masses. And I think it's very difficult on one hand to do that. And the reason why it's so difficult is that most human beings, and I'm guilty of this too, to some degree, is that I want to please everyone, and that when I go to create, I get nervous that if I do something, maybe I take a risk and I try something, that people aren't going to like it. They're going to criticize me. I'm stepping too far outside of the traditional, circle of what we call acceptable photography. And so I think that fear often keeps us from really being who we are, right? An individual with a certain, I work really well under a certain parameter. I'm colorblind. Um, I would call myself somewhat technical, but when it comes to math or something like that, I couldn't code. I could. My brain doesn't work in that world of abstracts. I'm very visual, but if I have to learn something technical, I will. And if you look at my lighting, the lighting techniques that I've come up with over the years, they've all sort of fallen into my lap because I have explored them visually. I take a softbox and I go, what happens if I back it up 5 feet? What happens if I bring it in 22 inches from the subject? What happens if I use 3 lights, 2 lights, or a reflector? Or I'm always challenging myself to say, what if I tried this? And in that process, I have discovered what I think I call it, I cracked the code to lighting. I know how light works now, and it's all been visual. It's a visual process. Observing it, experimenting it, and then it's not a notebook with a bunch of calculations in it that tell me what to do. It's my ability to see and my intuition to tell me what I'm doing right or wrong. But going back to this concept that, as we call photographer, artists, creatives, I see, and I have to really force myself to think that if I feel like what I'm doing fits me, then I'm going to refine that and do really. I'm going to work that whatever that problem I'm trying to solve or that risk that I'm taking. I'm going to do it really well, and at the end result of that, I'm going to make a stamp that has Joel Grimes on it. And so I'm willing to take that risk and that journey down to that end. And sometimes at the beginning, I've had colleagues say, "Joel, that stuff, no one's going to like that. You're going to, that's not going to work in the industry." And then later on, it really did. It put me on the map. So, but I had to refine it. I think a lot of times people try something and they do it poorly.
Yeah.
They're on the right
give
track,
up,
but
and they give
they
up
give up.
immediately. Yeah.
Yes, they don't finish it off and refine it. But if you look at music, music is such a great sort of industry analogy to look at how you look at someone like Bob Dylan. Maybe some of your viewers don't even know who Bob Dylan is. They're that young, but he's a nasally voice, and he knows like 10 chords. That's all he knows on the guitar. But he had such a big influence in the industry because he did his way. He had a signature voice, signature sound, and he was a poet. And you may not like his style, but we know who Bob Dylan is for the
Right.
most part.
Right.
So that's what I say to young photographers is take that risk. Go out and literally beat an idea into the ground enough, and you'll get an audience that will love it. That's just the way the world works. Because think about this. You ever seen someone drive a car, brand new car, and you look at that car and you go, why would anyone buy that? That's the ugliest car, on the market.
Chevy
But
Avalanche in 1999 for me.
So there's a few duds out there,
Yeah.
right? But they paid the money and they think it's a great car. And I think the same thing happens with what carpet we pick or what couch we buy. You scratch your head at some people's choices.
You have to be a trendsetter. You have to blaze a few trails out there, and I think obviously I will say this, like you've kind of proved yourself. You've done this long enough that people look up to you and respect you, and so you can be a trendsetter because you've kind of earned some of that respect. Not to say you're still not fighting for something new every day, but I think you have a proven track record that you've done something that works, and so I think some will say, well, Joel can try something new because he's already got that track record, and Joel can kind of push the boundaries a little bit, and people will respect that because Joel is who Joel is. So what would you say to that, if people say, well, you can get away with more because you've kind of proved yourself?
Yeah, there are times I get a pass, and then I look at that and I think, well, I don't deserve a pass. I mean, I think I should be critiqued on the level of everyone else. But there are a lot of times I get shredded. People shred my work all the time. They say uh, sometimes nasty things about me, and my wife doesn't like that. But that I'm full of it or whatever it is that I'm doing. Or things where I'll do something and like for example, I'll do a picture that's an Irving Penn sort of influence, and then someone will say, well, you're just copying Irving Penn. I'm like, well, yeah, he influenced me. I mean, back in the 50s, and 60s, 70s, he was the king of portrait beauty fashion. And I'm influenced by that, And there's nothing wrong with being influenced, but I'm not setting out necessarily to copy Irving Penn, but so I have to, look at that and go, well, okay, whatever, I think some people just want to be mean, and so you get a lot of those people on social media. But one of the things that I think that has served me very well, and I think that your listeners and viewers may think about this, and that is, I came out of the fine arts with a degree in photography at the University of Arizona. So that did not set me up for success in the real world. I can tell you that. And so I didn't have a clue at what arena, like we were talked about, maybe, did I do weddings? Yeah, I did about 30 weddings in college. I wanted to be a working photographer. I didn't know what that meant. And so I had to look at the industry. I didn't know ad agencies versus graphic design studios, or editorial versus corporate work, or I didn't know those terms at all. So I was as blind as you can be going out into the world. I had a buddy who graduated from Art Center in Pasadena, and he understood advertising. So he knew that arena. So when we shared a studio and got together, he said to me, we're going after ad agencies. That's the arena to go after. And I'm like, okay, I didn't know what that meant, right? So I was very fortunate that I had someone that pushed me in that direction. And the reason why that was so important is because that's where the money is, number one. Not that it's all about money, but that's where the money is. But also the advertising arena is the pinnacle of the best photography, meaning that it is the, because you have to sell an ad and you have to sell your viewer you got 3 seconds to sell your viewer. It has to be super clean. It's the highest pinnacle of the craft, at least in my opinion, as a photographer. Now you could say Henry Cartier-Bresson was a street photographer and he was the decisive moment. And I'm not talking about street photography, but or if you're a travel photographer, National Geographic might be the pinnacle of success in that arena. But if you look at advertising, it is the best of the best. And so I had to go and learn all that. I had to learn that skill set to compete at the top of the food chain. And then when I take that skill set and I go and do my own personal work or whatever, I carry all that skill set with me. And so you look at my work, it's very clean, it's lit as perfect as I could possibly do it, but it's thought out. It's not just throw a light up.
Sure, everything's methodical and planned out, and
So and that was a good, I guess a good flight for me. A plight, I guess that's the right word, but a projection of me going and saying I want to work at the top of the food chain, and so a lot of people, they send me work or I look at work and it's sloppy. They just do sloppy stuff. And you look at that and you go, well, okay, with time, they're going to get better. Because a lot of times you start out doing sloppy stuff and then you clean it up as you get better and better because you're practicing over and over. But I think you have to think about, if you're, for example, a wedding photographer. I use this analogy all the time. And this is really important to understand. And I'm not a psychologist or I was barely a C student. So when it comes to analyzing things, maybe I'm missing the mark, but I feel like I really understand human behavior and also how people behave. And I'll give you an example how I think. You're a wedding photographer and you want to make a living with your camera and you're out there trying to drum up business for your livelihood. And you're spinning your wheels, and there's always 5 photographers that pretty much rule every city. 5 wedding photographers that rule, right? They're all busy, they're all working, they're crazy, but if you put and I do this when I go and I pitch at an ad agency, and I think about who am I pitching? What is that person thinking across the desk from me or whatever? Or in the boardroom, I'm showing a portfolio, or a client, a CEO, or whatever. And what is their goals? What is it that a CEO wants? Or if I'm doing an annual report or something where there's an oil and gas company, what is their goal? What are they trying to project to the outside world about their company? And they're using photography to do that. So I'm always thinking about the person that I'm pitching or I'm working for. But if you go back to weddings, think about this. Who is it that you have to win over to sign you up for a wedding?
The mother of the bride.
The mother and the bride. Okay. Now, the mother and bride are, when they begin the process of putting this wedding day, this big incredible day. It's the day that has to be recorded, and a lot of money is going into this day. It's a big deal. And where is the bride to be and the mother looking for ideas? What is it that they're looking at when they go and say, I want this cake, I want this dress, I want
ask Olivia that.
Style.
Olivia's in that market.
Other people's weddings, yeah.
Other people's weddings, Pinterest, social media.
Well, okay, you go to bridal magazines, okay? You go to Pinterest, you go to all these places, right? And you're looking at the best of the best photography, okay? So you go to a bridal magazine, and we've kind of passed, we don't use as many magazines today as we used to. We use the internet more now, but just to kind of cruise through and look at ideas. But if you still think about this, if you look at a bridal magazine and you open it up, what a lot of people don't understand is that any magazine, but a bridal magazine, has ad content, editorial content. It's mixed in together, right? So you open a page, there's an ad. Wow. And they've paid hundreds, maybe not hundreds, but let's say $100,000 or maybe $80,000 to pull off that ad campaign. And then you have the editorial content, which is a lower end of photography, but it's still a pretty good look. The photographers are doing it. They're not shooting a bride in this columns of incredible interior, exterior, or whatever of some place with the light absolutely perfect on the bride. That's not for a bride. That's for the magazine. So they got the best locations, the best dress, the best makeup, the best models,
Everything's
everything.
stylized.
Yes. And then the bride and the groom, or the bride and the mother, look at that and they go, "Oh my gosh, look at that dress. Oh, look at that hairstyle. Look at this. Look at that. Look at." And that's what they're dreaming of, that for that wedding to come, right? So what I say is that for you to win over the wedding market, you have to produce images that are on the same quality as ad work or high-end editorial work.
Yeah.
If you don't, what happens is the bride to be and the mother come into your studio or whatever it is, they go to your website and they look at your work and it's okay photography. It's good, but it's not really up to the same level as an advertising or a really high-end editorial photographer.
So how do you feel like that differs from, I mean, any other client? I understand like a bride's very picky about what she wants, but with commercial photography, do you feel like you're competing against, I guess, other commercial work?
You always are.
Yeah.
No matter what you're doing, you're always competing against the top of the food chain. It trickles down from there. So I always say, as a photographer, let's say I live in Podunk, Iowa, somewhere, and there's a town of 100,000 people, and I want to make a good living there. I still have to go and develop the skill sets that compete on a national level, because that'll always give me a line of people out my door.
Yeah.
So if you're a photographer and you're not busy, it's because you generally don't have your skill level up to what it should be, and you're not a very good marketer. And so you have to learn those two skill sets.
Yeah.
If you don't, you'll always be starving.
And this kind of goes back to, I think, when I asked you, why are you running the different direction? You gave an answer, and it's like you have that artistic blood in you, but you're also kind of a rare breed where you're not all artsy. You also have the work ethic and the marketing,
Mm-hmm. The drive. Yeah, that
the
was
drive.
kind of one of my
I mean,
questions
you
too.
complete the puzzle. Like I know so many people that are purely artistic and they're amazing, but they won't ever sell, I mean, a piece. Just period. They do it maybe because it's their pleasure, or they're just extremely talented. And then I know people who are extremely good marketers, but they're not artists and they're not, And so you're kind of bridging that gap with your drive from getting from that artistic side, and then the drive carries you onto the marketing side, and that helps you as a seller.
And the reason why I even have what I would call a skill set in marketing is because that was a part of the puzzle that I was very weak at,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew I had to learn it.
So where'd you learn it? Did you have a group of like colleagues? Was it a studio mate that helped you?
It was mainly my first studio mate, Steve Salmon's a friend of mine, that we got a studio together in Denver. He was the art center guy. He was really good at marketing. What I learned from him was in the early first part of it was how to make cold calls, and it was so brutal in the early days for me to make a cold call that I'd literally be shaking on the phone, so nervous, and I knew I had to overcome that, and I knew that if I practiced it enough, eventually I would. And I think that's from my sport days of learning how to hit a ball or whatever it is in sports. That the more you practice, the greater the end result will be. So I eventually got really good at cold calling, and then of course sending out packets and all the marketing side of things. And so that's been my life. Marketing has been my life for the last 35 years. I thought when I went to school, I would be a photographer.
So
But
what percentage
I had
is the photography? I think a lot of people are curious. what percentage of your work is behind the camera?
I had this saying that I used to do, and I would say, if I'm not shooting, I'm not in front of that camera, either testing a shot or shooting for a client, I'm marketing. So I shoot, market, shoot, market, shoot, market. That was my motto. And uh, the other thing that a lot of photographers did was they would shoot for a client, and then they'd sit there and wait for the phone to ring.
So would you say
I
it's
never wait.
50-50, or do you think you're focused more on marketing?
I think that marketing is about 70% of the time.
Yeah, that seems about
I hate
right.
to say that,
Well,
but that's about.
it's real. I mean, and I think that's what people like to hear is like, you know, and I think a lot of people say, well, I got an Instagram page and I set up my Facebook and now I'm just ready for the calls to come in.
Well, and they might think like pushing more content out there is going to get the recognition that they want. But like you said, you have to put yourself out there in other ways.
I have this saying, and it was a slide I use when I do my marketing stuff. It says, persistence will win over more art directors or clients than a great portfolio.
Yeah, I think that's true in
So
many things in life too. Persistence will pay dividends, whatever you're trying to achieve.
See, we think it's kind of a blow to our ego when we think that my photography is not enough, or it should be
Right.
enough, but it's
Right.
not. It's not enough. It's a blow to me that I have to actually go out there and hustle and try to twist people's arms, but I have to.
All right, Joel, we're going to switch gears. We're going to switch gears a little bit. You slipped something in, and I don't want to let it go. You are colorblind, and you're very open about this.
Yes.
For anybody that knows Joel, give me the example how you think that helps you as a photographer, and how you think that limits you as a photographer.
Well, in the early days, I thought it would limit me, and I discovered something amazing, and that is when I first was doing architecture work, and I'd go into an interior, and I'd have to get the right color balance. And the lab that I used in Denver at the time, there was a guy that kind of gave me a little tip that really helped me. And this is back in the film days, but I would walk in with a 35 millimeter. Let's say I was shooting, a slide film, not Kodachrome, but an Ektachrome slide film, whatever, transparency film. And I would go to this building, a scout, and I would just take a picture, click, handhold, whatever. And then I'd bring it back. We'd process the film, and then he'd lay it on a light color balance table, and then he'd put these little gels in front of it, and he'd go, "Okay, Joel, you need 20 magenta and a 10 yellow." Then I'd go back with my 4x5, and I'd put those little filters on there, and I'd take the picture and come back, and every time it nailed it. Didn't have a color meter.
So he was your cheat. He was your secret weapon back then.
Yeah. Well, back then that really helped me a lot because I couldn't determine that. Now, but as I shifted into, but even before digital, I was doing a lot of black and white, very delicate portraits. And I think I see light. I see light, how light strikes a face. I'm very, very critical on, just the Rembrandt triangle or just how a certain gradation across one cheek looks on film or on digital. I move my light or my subject to get that perfect, light on the face. So I've been doing that for years. What happened when I went from the film days to digital days, or where we're at now, where I had to learn Photoshop and manipulate my images, I realized that I had to separate myself from the masses. I learned that when I shot Type 55 4x5 portraits for 10 years, and it launched me nationally. And because I had this certain look, this certain feel, and art directors really responded to it. So when that look kind of came to an end, the digital started exploding, and more color. People wanted color, and a lot of photographers were going really saturated.
Super saturated. Yeah, that was the nasty part of the early digital age.
Yeah, and so what I did is I went the opposite. I went desaturated color,
which would help you
because that's how I see. And what I realized is that all these non-colorblind people were clamoring to figure out how I was getting my end results in
Mm.
Photoshop.
Hmm.
And that's how I got, um, uh, I remember buying uh, Kelby 1 or Kelby, back then it was what was before Kelby 1? Kelby Training and Kelby 1. But I remember buying a membership and going on there and going looking at stuff, And then one day I came across a blog and it was Scott Kelby trying to tell people, well, this is how Joel Grimes does his thing. I didn't even know Scott. He didn't know me, but he was trying to figure it out because people were asking about it. And when I came across that blog, my jaw hit the floor and I thought, how can a colorblind person be influencing the industry at a certain look? I just couldn't believe it. What it did was, what I realized is that I create a photo in Photoshop the way I like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I make decisions based on what I like. And a lot of times I am not really aware of the subtleties of the color changes. I'm just looking at the screen going, too green or too this, too that. I'm pulling sliders and I go, I like it. Then I send it out and people go, oh my gosh, what is he doing? What gradient techniques is he doing to get that look, right? And so I realized that my color blindness actually has become the ace up my sleeve, so to speak. It's the thing that sort of helps me separate myself from the masses because I'm going down a path that fits me 100% perfectly. And I've done gazillions of high-end ad campaigns where I am retouching all the final images. And I'm handing those images to the art directors and they're putting them on billboards. And it's a colorblind retoucher that's finishing off that work. It absolutely blows my mind, but it's a testimony to how the marketplace works. Is the industry is not, as a general rule, is not interested in perfectly color balanced
Let me
images.
ask you this though.
They're interested in,
I know some brands are very specific about their color, like
yes,
Coca-Cola Red, John Deere Green.
exactly.
What would you do for a commercial job like that where they have such an identifiable color?
I did a campaign for Crown Royal, and they have a purple brand. And I was finishing off the image, and I went to the final. I went and got a blue photo filter and a red photo filter, and I pulled the sliders until I thought, okay, purple is probably, let's say, 75% blue. Let's just say 25% red. I don't know. I'm just throwing the number out here. And I captured a JPEG, sent it off to the client, and he goes, well, let's see. I think we need a little more red in there. So I went back, slid the red slider over, sent it off. 3 times it took, but I got the perfect purple. I don't see the purple, but I got it to them, and they ran the ad in the magazines and everything else.
Uh-huh.
So,
So for everyone listening, if they don't have the drive, just be colorblind.
well, or here's what I would say is that we all have something that we could probably say is a handicap, or
Sure.
something that we're not very good at.
Absolutely. You'd be lying to yourself if you didn't. If you said you didn't.
Yes. And I would say that what we call, say, a handicap or whatever it is, could be your ticket to success.
Yeah. That's a great point.
It could be something that I was in Barcelona, and my wife Amy's going to kill me because I don't remember the cathedral, the name of the cathedral, but it's this cathedral that's more of it was considered at the time a modern design of not the traditional cathedral. And the architect that did that, the columns are like, they look like trees that come up into the ceiling and whatever. Anyways, it's very famous. It's been under construction for like 150 years or 200, I don't know, some really long time. But the architect was a very sickly child when he was little. And instead of going to school at that time, whenever it was, he would go out, his mom would take him out in the forest, and they'd lay in the forest and just absorb life lessons. And all that childhood of him, he was very sick. Later, when he got healthy, that influence of nature while he was sick, became his signature look as an architect later in life. And so there's a lot of things that happen to us. We get beat up in an alley and get left for dead, or we're an orphan left on a doorstep for, abandoned, or whatever it is. There's things in our lives that happen that I believe can shape us as a positive thing for in the future of who we are.
Well, that's with a certain attitude, absolutely. I mean,
Yep.
you're that's a glass half full attitude, and unfortunately, a lot of people look at things with a glass half empty attitude, and it sets them towards a totally different path. So,
Who do you want to hang out with?
yeah, 100%. I want to hang out with successful people and people that have a positive attitude, outlook on life. That's going to rub off on you, right?
I remember I have this assistant that I used for years when I was out in DC, and every time I see him now, he always laughs. He says, yeah, for the last 25 years, he's been on his own as a photographer, but he always says, "What would Joel do?" Because when I get out in a situation, I always look at the positive. If there's a problem in front of me, I always go, "Oh, that's not really a problem. Let's do it. Let's do this." One time I was doing an ad campaign for carpooling. It was through I don't know, Washington State or Washington D.C. or Virginia or Maryland, whatever. And so we had all the art directors, creative directors, and talent. We had this car that we brought in to put these people in, and I was strobing it, and these people are like sitting in the car going like they're driving down the road. And we get the car, and the very first thing that we noticed was that the back windows only went down halfway. It was like a Ford Taurus or something. And I'm like, what car has windows that only go down halfway, right? And so, and we had everything there, all the talent, everything's ready to go. The light, the early morning, and the windows are halfway up. They can't go all the way down. We needed them all the way down. And as soon as that happened, I went, "Oh, no problem." I ran over and got a screwdriver, and I started tearing the doors apart, and I pulled the window right out of it. And we go on with the shoot. And my friend Joe laughs. He goes, "There's never a problem that Joel can't try to solve." I would have taken a rock to the thing and just busted it.
Yeah, that was going to be the story. I thought you were going to walk over and smash him.
It's not a glitch. Let's just move forward. It's fun solving problems, and there's always a way to do something and to get things moving forward.
Well, I think a lot of people, how I explain it, I think a lot of people, their jobs are professional problem solving. Are you solving problems in the field of accounting? Are you solving problems in the field of photography? Are you veterinary? What are you solving problems on today? You're going to have problems or tasks, but everything can be called a problem or a task. You just check them off. Just keep going. That's kind of life, whether it's family, work, whatever. So, well, Joel, I have a question for you. Who do you look up to? Because I know a lot of people listen and look up to you. Who are some of the people you look up to?
Here, one of the questions that I get, it's a similar question, is I am influenced by other photographers. I love to see a photographer that has work that I'm jealous, right? I go, "Oh, I wish that was my work," or "I wish I could do it that well," right? So I love that, because then that becomes a benchmark for me to reach, or a goal for me to go out after.
Right.
And so I've been influenced by a lot of photographers, not just some of the great masters that we talked about, Irving Penn and whatever. But I'll tell you who really influences me the most is when I see someone who never sits still and is a hard worker. It's the hardworking people that win me over. I hate lazy people.
So not necessarily photographers, just generally you're motivated by or you're inspired by motivated people.
Yes. I'm like, I want to be like that.
Yeah.
And I love it when one of my assistants says, I go, how do you think today went? And they go, "You wore me out," because I'm going 100 miles an hour, right? And I love that. I love people that are like that just that don't wait. They go and move forward. And so those kind of, and I see people too that are very good marketers, and I'll go, I can learn from that person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not so much photography that other photographers that do influence me, but I think it's just people in the industry that are very successful. I like to sort of I want to learn something from them.
Sure. Great answer. I love that. Well, Joel, we are a good length in, and there's a million things that we could ask you, but we'll save that for season 2. What I want to know is, where can people find your work? Where can people find your education? Tell the listeners and the viewers where they can get your information.
Well, everything goes through joelgrimes.com. My portfolio is in there. You can click on, just scroll down to portfolio, or just go portfolio.joelgrimes.com. I just updated my website with some new images. I had just been so far behind. So I'm kind of excited. I put a whole new menu or a section of some of the cowboy stuff I was doing. The still life stuff I was doing, which, people think I'm a portrait photographer. Some new stuff that finally got up there. I just finished the Beauty Portrait Masterclass, not out yet, but I just finished editing it. I'm looking forward to getting that out to educate people, hopefully. And so
I've heard nothing but positive things, by the way, on those master classes that you're doing. Excellent work. They're very affordable, and it's not just like the University of YouTube content that you can get. I mean, this stuff you go pretty deep, and you can be a fly on the wall and see everything that Joel's doing. So
and
those classes are awesome.
I love, there's 2 things I love teaching more than anything, and we'll leave it at this. I love teaching people about how to make a living with their camera, and I love teaching people about lighting. Those are the 2 things I love more than anything. I get so excited when I see someone grasp this mystery of lighting. They get it. They're like, oh, that makes sense now. And I love it when someone calls me up or emails me and says, your marketing class changed my life, and now I'm making a living with my camera.
Unbelievable. That's got to be the most rewarding comment that you can hear from a fellow photographer. Well, awesome. Well, Joel, we appreciate your time today. I know the listeners appreciate it. Anybody that's watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel below. And if you are listening, wherever you get your podcast, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you're notified every time we release a new episode of Photo Pros Weekly. For Olivia and Joel, I'm Brandon. Have a great week. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week.